Hello everyone, it's Revd Sophie and Father Neil here, who we are here to talk to you today about setting up a youth group. Now this is the first of many, hopefully, online monthly tutorials, sessions, perhaps guidelines, things that perhaps might help you in your ministry wherever you are in your parishes. And so every month we're going to bring together people from around the diocese who have some skills in various different areas. Now today we're going to talk to you about youth groups and how we go about setting up youth groups, what we need to do when we're setting up a youth group, and this comes from best possible practice and also years of experience. Father Neil has had many years in the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon as youth worker there, so he knows what he's talking about, and so he's the man I've asked to help us today. So Father Neil, tell us a little bit about you.
I've been in the Diocese of St David's for 3.5 years. Before that, I was in the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon for 22 years. I spent the 5 years as the Assistant Diocesan Youth Officer, and then I spent nearly 7 years as the Diocesan Youth Officer for that diocese. And my role was very much like Sophie's, so it was resourcing, supporting and authorising work that was going on within the parishes, as well as doing hands-on youth work for diocesan youth events as well. There are very many different circumstances and different contexts within the Diocese of Swansea and Brecon. In the same way, there are very many different circumstances and contexts within the Diocese of St David's, ranging from the inner city work that was done in Swansea itself, right up to the work that was done in the rural contexts of the deepest, darkest Powys.
Thank you, Father Neil. So to youth groups then, I guess one of the first things that we're going to talk about is the difference between a youth group and a youth club, because there are differences. So we need to know those differences when we're doing ministry. So let's have a quick skip through what it is that's the differences between youth groups and youth clubs.
Okay, so within the context of youth ministry, generally speaking, a youth club is more of a drop-in that is open to young people of a certain age. You will provide resources and the opportunity to come alongside those people, and the contact that you have would be perhaps more informal, and it would be the opportunity to share your faith with other people. Whereas a youth group is something where you intentionally bring a group of young Christians together, and it is more overtly Christian and has a stronger element of discipleship and teaching. Both of them have things in common, both involve games and fun, and of course have young people at the heart, but there's just a slightly different intention, and there's absolutely no reason why you can't have both. Why having a youth club can't lead young people to a profession of faith, and that then works them into a youth group. But we should really, before we even get to those terminologies, talk about what a young person is. What age a young person is.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It was the next question I was going to ask you, is what age are we looking at? When we say a youth group or youth club, what age are we really looking at?
Well, if we were to take the education system in Wales, then we would really say that a young person is between the ages of 11 and 18, somebody who's in secondary school. But actually, experience within the church has taught us that 11-year-olds and 18-year-olds seldom have a lot in common. And trying to bridge that gap is sometimes too great a challenge. That sometimes you want to talk about having different stepping stones on the way. So have a group that covers maybe 10 to 13, 14 to 16, and then have 17 and 18-year-olds who are starting to transition into junior leadership positions. And then They would go 17 and 18 as junior leadership, and then maybe 19, 20, 21 as assistant leaders before they were thinking about actually taking on responsibility for themselves. But in the end, it's contextual. It depends on the young people who are there.
So once we've decided on whether we're running a youth club or a youth group, and we've decided on what age group that we are planning the youth group to cover, what then are the next steps before we actually start a youth group?
Running a youth group or a youth ministry of any sort has got to be a whole church activity. It's not something that can be left into the hands of a small group of only 2 or 3 people. They may actually be responsible for the practical outworking of that ministry, the practical running of that youth group, but experience has taught us that it's going to be doomed to fail if the congregation and the community aren't behind it. Youth ministry isn't and shouldn't be something that takes young people and separates them out from the life of the church and creates a sort of ghetto where they can do what they want. There's actually a danger, if you've got young Christians in your congregation, of putting on these wonderful youth events and actually drawing them from out of the worship of the church so that they don't attend with the rest of the church anymore. So if you can possibly take seriously the challenge that you've got before you, and the congregation and your church council and your LMA council or your association of churches can think carefully, how are we as an entire church family going to pray this into being, provide the support both practically in terms of resources, and it will cost money and it will cost time. And if you're not prepared to put that money and that time in place, then the young people are going to know that actually you're not taking this step seriously. But also, how, once we get this group of young people going, are we going to welcome them into the existing life of the church, the existing provision of ministry, and how are we going to listen to their voices? And how are we going to remember that the young people that gather and worship in his name are as much the church of today as anybody else is? They're not the church of tomorrow. They're the church of the now.
That's really helpful. I guess another thing that we perhaps need to think about is that prayer element that you mentioned. Actually, that's a really, really important part of the process, isn't it? It's that making sure that the people are in the church, and perhaps maybe even setting up a group of people who are constantly praying for the youth group, even if they can't commit to helping on a regular basis within the group itself. They can pray then for the youth, for the leaders, and for those who are organising and doing the practical things. So what else might we need to do before we start the group? We probably need to think about leadership. Where would you go in terms of leadership?
Well, we can't run before we can walk, and we can't walk before we can crawl. And quite often, being called to work with young people can be quite scary. You can feel as if you're not necessarily experienced or that you don't have the skills that you need. So rushing in to creating youth work and grabbing random people from the congregation isn't necessarily going to work. You need enthusiastic volunteers, but if they haven't had that experience, they can always get it. There are existing youth groups and youth work going on in the diocese. You don't need to start things next month. By the time you've worked through the process, you've got the administration in place, you've got the insurances in place, you've done the risk assessments and that sort of thing. And those may seem scary, but that's when people like myself and Sophie and others who are on the Children, Youth and Families Taskforce of the diocese can come alongside you. By the time you've got that in place, then the volunteers who may be interested will have had the opportunity to dip their toes in the water in perhaps neighbouring LMA or a neighbouring congregation. Remember, there are also perhaps people within your community that are already engaged in youth work with perhaps the uniformed organisations like Guides and Brownies and Scouts and Sea Cadets and Army Cadets and the St John's Ambulance and those sort of things. So you can think about gathering those people and drawing on their expertise as well. But in the end, a youth ministry is not just about supporting the young people, it's about the whole congregation supporting the volunteers as well, because they're the tip. Those are the people that are going to have contact with the young Christians.
Once we've found the right leaders, once we've prepared, once we've got the risk assessment in place and everything else that we need to do and to ensure that the youth group is running smoothly, is that then the time to start thinking about starting a youth group? Are there any other steps that you would say that we need to put in place before we go forward?
Well, in the end, you're going to have to take that plunge. But we do know that poor planning leads to poor performance. So we do need to just make sure that we've got our I's dotted and that we've got our T's crossed. And a really easy way of doing that is by remembering that we are not a congregational church here in the Diocese of St David's. You're not by yourself. You're part of an LMA structure and you're part of the diocese. And there are people like Sophie in particular, as the Children, Youth and Families officer, but other people within the diocese who have experience and expertise. And so they can work through things with you and with your wider congregation as well. But in the end, once you think you've got everything in place, that's when you need to make that start. And really, the minimum number is what we call the 5 loaves and 2 fish. So what you're going to need is you're going to need 2 adult leaders minimum, and you're probably going to need, for a youth group, 3 young people from your congregation and 2 others that you can invite in to make a group of 5. A dynamic of 5 is good because if 1 or 2 of them is away in any particular session, it can still go ahead. And 2 leaders are absolutely the minimum. Now, it may be that one of those leaders is ordained, either your priest or a curate, but that is only and should ever only be a temporary appointment. In the end, it needs to be owned by the congregation, and the clergy can then come alongside and resource what is going on.
So once we've done all the preparation and we've got to the point where we're ready to run our youth group, where do we go next? Do we send out invitations to young people? Do we send out invites to schools? Do we do all of these things? How do we go about approaching bringing people into the youth group?
Bitter experience has taught us that social media campaigns and posters are not really effective at drawing young people together. That in the end, it's personal invitations and word of mouth that works. We're starting small and we're building a relational church. And so much of what young people have experience of is faith and fidelity in relationships. Young people these days can be quite skeptical about organisations and authorities. So if the church is inviting them to come forward, they may be reluctant. But if somebody that they know and trust is inviting them to come to a sequence of events, not making a long-term commitment, do not make the mistake of saying we're going to be meeting every Friday night for infinity and we want you to make that level of commitment, because young people's lives are really, really crammed at the moment. Instead, we would suggest that you set up a short program of maybe 6 sessions fortnightly that are linked together, and you issue personal invitations, either yourself or members of your congregation inviting their children, their grandchildren, nephews, nieces, neighbours, friends, whatever, to come along to those particular 6 sessions and emphasise the fun, the F in faith, the fun bit as well. Learning through fellowship, learning through fun.
I've just thought of a really good way of remembering 3 things that you should probably have at any youth group. Fun, food, and faith. Fun, food, and faith. That seems like a really good way of remembering the 3 things that are quite important to a youth group. So food was the next thing I was going to talk to you about. Is it a good idea to have food?
Well, the scriptural basis for the church gathering together and eating is so strong and has proven itself again and again and again when we talk about the discipling courses that we have with Alpha and Emmaus and all the others. Food is a part of that, and it is really, really easy actually to get food for young people, because young people's idea of fine dining is completely different to adults. So pizza, pasta, hot dogs, burgers, that sort of thing is something that can be easy, and young people think that that is brilliant.
Yeah.
So you don't have to think about providing a 3-course meal, although of course it's always best to make sure that you're aware of any dietary reasons before you would load the food up.
Now, if you're inviting children, youngsters from outside of the church, how would you go about advertising that? So would you make it absolutely clear from the get-go that this is a faith-based group and that you will be talking about Jesus?
Do not do the bait and switch, okay? Make it clear from the outset. Do not say, we're setting up this youth thing and it's called this really sexy name on Friday nights, once a fortnight, in our local hall. Come along, play ping pong, play snooker, and when they get there, suddenly you ambush them with Jesus. That doesn't come across as authentic, and the young people, if you're not careful, will start to talk to others within their social circles, and they'll start to issue warnings. So best to be absolutely open and honest, but at the same time, remember these are young people coming from outside of the church. They're either unchurched, or if they attended before in the past, they're de-churched. So you're going to want to be gentle with them. It's not a Bible study group. It's not a young people's Bible study group. It's a youth group. And it's as much the opportunity for those young people to come together and build relationships and build supportive networks between themselves and with other adults as it is anything else. Being a young Christian today is really, really tough. You're given a hard time by other young people if you go to church, if you attend a fellowship. So the opportunity to come together and to be authentically yourself and have fun whilst doing it is something that is going to resonate to the young Christian. And for those who are wondering, for those who are considering, for those who are debating, being drawn into that situation where they see young people who are exploring their faith genuinely being themselves, being affirmed, being accepted, and having the opportunity to be a young person and have fun, then that is going to strike them.
Thank you. So after all of that, what would you say is an ideal youth group program for the evening?
I'd say an ideal youth group programme for an evening would be once a fortnight between 5 and 7 on a weekday, and not necessarily on a Friday, Saturday or Sunday night. Although, again, that's contextual. That it would involve food, and that there would be a time of socialisation to begin with, where they just come in because they're going to come in at staggered times, and people are going to be late and some people are going to be early, where they just relax and they get to know each other once again and reconnect and share the stories of the week that's gone by. and then an icebreaker, and one singular activity that focuses on a discrete piece of Christian teaching that they can explore. Not something that's too overwhelming. Give them the opportunity to respond creatively, and then draw that to a close and finish with the breaking of the bread, finish with the food, and then send them on their way. Don't make the mistake of being too late at night, because if you don't start till 7 and you don't finish till 9 on a school night, that's a real problem.
Father Neil, you have been awesome. Thank you very much. We are going to hand over to Colleen and Mike from the Centre of Mission in Haverfordwest, Merlin's Bridge, and they are going to give us their top tips for youth groups as well. And then,
so, at the Haverfordwest Centre of Mission, my name's Mike there, I'm the lead evangelist.
And I'm the pioneer evangelist, Colleen.
And we do lots of different things. And one of the things was when we first came here, there had been a youth drop-in in the past, but lockdown had hit that on its head, if you will. So one of the first things that we did was actually we just went to the football pitch and just started playing football with kids as soon as lockdown had lifted it all. And we were also online on this bizarre game called Among Us. So we basically we helped people to know who we were by having always two adults who are DBS'd together in every situation. Safeguarding is very important. And we just tried to build relationships with people by showing them who we are. So one of the things we do as a Centre of Mission is we have a vision where we build up a network where we bring healing by building a family that hears God's voice together. So we recognise that was something which actually God wanted to do amongst youth as well. So it was always about listening to what the Holy Spirit was doing in this context. We also have 5 values, which are humility, honesty, humour, hunger for God, and honouring. No, we don't. As well as good memory. And so we also, and the final thing is, so we have a vision, we have values, and we also have a vibe that we want to build. Colleen in just a minute is going to share more of the vibe that we've built in the youth drop-in and how it therefore bears fruit. I started 2 years ago, Colleen started 8 months ago, so I was actually there at the very start, even before we had a youth drop-in, and then all the way through the different process. So at the very start, we built relationship, as I said, with the young people by playing football, by being online, and just trying to remember their names. Genuinely, there was like 100 of them. I was trying to remember names in this new context. And actually, just be yourself. Genuinely, if you're not down and cool with the kids, I mean, Colleen's quite hip, not so much.
Not really.
Just be yourself. Just be yourself. So yeah, however, I think young people especially, they really, they seek out authenticity, and also they sniff out fakeness. So if you try and be something that you're not, you'll lose them in seconds. So with young people, it does take a good 3 or 4 weeks to build any level of trust with them. I went along to play football consistently the same time every week, and I was consistently fantastic at football and awful at understanding all sorts of things of what they were talking about with the new computer games and stuff like that. But actually, once we built a relationship with them, then we also got to know what their rhythms and their routines of the week were, and what kind of places they went to, and we recognised what they needed as well. So it was always done in what we call triple listening. So we're listening to what God is saying, we're listening to the context, we're listening to the young people, and then we're also listening to ourselves. We're listening to the background and the things that we're good at. So I'm good at football. I am
not good at football. Just saying.
She might be a good goalkeeper. We're going to find that out soon.
No, we're not.
That's going to be the next video. Just you wait. So I recognised for myself the things that I was good at and the things that I wasn't good at. Quite a few of the young people like skateboarding. I'm no good at skateboarding, but I can make a fool out of myself. So it's listening to who you are and what you bring to the situation. Then we were listening to God. We were really getting a sense of, we knew that He wanted to bring a place where people could really belong. They would belong before they believed in anything and before they behaved. So it was belonging, believing, and behaving. This is stuff that we really sensed was some of the principles that God was teaching us. And the third one is you listen to the young people. What do they want? What do they need? When and where?
Stop stealing my points.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And then we started up a youth drop-in based around what the times and locations where they would be. So we found We found a certain place that they were always walking past, and we opened it up and just got permission for the premises, risk assessed the whole place. Safeguarding is very important. Done all of that stuff, and then we were able to just say, okay, we'll be here each week, and we gave them food and drink, and we started having some board games, which is some of the stuff that we had. And since then, it's developed even further. So that was the values that we had, the vision that we had. And now, Colleen, how have we demonstrated the vibe that produces fruit?
So I would say that main points for me are consistency is probably step number one. Actually, no. Step number one is identifying who are your young people. So you want to start a youth group, but what young people are you trying to target? So you have to know your young people. What are they interested in? What is the demographic of the place where they live? And then what are their needs? So what do they need, but also what do they enjoy? So, you know, the youth group that we have might not work for the kind of young people you have. And so it's setting up a youth group that will actually benefit them and will work for them. And then another really important point is consistency. So I found that it took more like 8 weeks to really get the young people to trust me. And if you're consistent, then you will win their trust. And I think what Mike said about being yourself is really important. So they don't need another me or another Mike. They actually need you. And whether you're 80 years old, 50 years old, or 25 years old, it doesn't matter, because actually we all need family, and families are diverse. And so, you know, if you only had young people in your family, you'd be missing out from the older generation. And so literally what they need is you at your most authentic. And so we do loads of stuff. We do like stuff around card games, because that's Mike, because he's really good at card games. And we do other things that are more me. And we have a lady that comes in and she does crafts, and you wouldn't believe how impactful crafts have been for our young people, because that's our volunteer, that's what she's good at. And so so find out who are your young people, what do they need and what do they like, and be consistent, and then be yourself. Yeah, I think those are probably the main points for me, and that's how we've really built an atmosphere, which is what we call vibe.
Yeah.
So.
And I think one of the just the last bit that Colleen touched on there was the volunteers. And we are so blessed that we've had a few volunteers who have been really consistent. And with young people, if you think we've had 2 years of weird COVID world, if you're 14, that's like a seventh of your life. Yeah, that's right. Good maths. Phew. So actually being consistently every week with these people for a couple of years or something like that actually makes such a difference. And some of the volunteers that we've had, I just want to give a shout out to them. Actually, they've been absolutely amazing. So one of the ladies that Colleen was just mentioning there comes in and does the crafts, and she's just authentically herself. She's a totally different demographic and everything to ourselves and to the young people. And you know what? That actually produces a sense of family, because it's multi-generational, it's multi-skill, multi-personality sort of thing. As in, we're all bringing different personalities to the mix. That brings a really good chemistry. Another volunteer that we've got is just a little bit younger than ourselves. Colleen at this point would probably say a lot younger than me. And he actually is only a few years older than the young people themselves, so he links so well. So see, getting a good set of volunteers and making them know that they are so valuable. So if our volunteers ever listen to this, we love you.
We love you guys.
We really do. So guys, I hope that has been really helpful. Listen to God, listen to the young people, listen to yourselves, and you know what? Have fun.
Yeah.
Have fun. God bless,
Thanks
guys.
for listening.
Bye.
I just want to say a huge thank you to Father Neil, to Colleen and to Mike for all their help in creating this video. I want to say thank you to you guys for watching. It's my intention to make one of these videos every month, and it would be really good if you would feedback to me A, how helpful the videos are, B, if there's anything in particular you'd like us to talk about, C, if there's anything you think you can offer us. So perhaps you have a particular skill that you think would be helpful to the diocese, and so it would be really great if you could all join in any way that you think would be helpful. In the meantime, I'm going to leave some details, some contact details. If you need help with anything, if you need help with setting up youth groups or children's groups, if you need help with collective worship and you're not quite sure how to go about doing that, if there's anything you need help with in terms of children, youth and family, then I and the Children, Youth and Families Taskforce are more than happy to help you. So do please be in contact with us. But for now,